Introduction to Cost Sharing, presented by the Office of Sponsored Projects. You've been asked to complete this brief training because you are involved with a grant award that requires a cost sharing or matching component. Why is this training important? Managing a cost sharing grant requires additional responsibility and effort on the part of those leading the program, like the principal investigator or program director, as well as those managing expenditure of the grant funds, like the financial manager. Failure to follow the sponsor's cost-sharing rules can result in the Smithsonian having to repay or lose sponsors' grant funding. What is cost-sharing? A grant is considered to include cost-sharing when the sponsor requires the grantee, the Smithsonian, provide some of the project's funding from other sources. The grant is usually given with a ratio requirement, for example, a 1-to-1 match, as specified by the sponsor. The other sources that can contribute to the cost-sharing amount needed can be cash contributions or donations of in-kind services. These sources can originate within the Smithsonian from institutional funds or other grants or gifts received, or they can originate with an outside third party or collaborator. When is cost share needed? In general, the Smithsonian prefers to cost share on a sponsored project when the sponsor specifically requires it. Cost sharing can occur on federally or privately sponsored projects. Required cost share will be indicated in the guidelines given by the sponsor. When the institution is required to cost share, efforts should be made to satisfy the requirement from external funding sources before committing internal Smithsonian funds. Sources of cost share. Smithsonian internal sources can originate from unit or central funds if available, utilize volunteer hours if possible, costed at the going rate. Other grants or gifts made to the Smithsonian. These funds can't be committed as cost share on more than one project. Third-party or outside collaborator funds. Project collaborators from external organizations can be asked to provide cost share. The external organization must document, certify, and report their cost-sharing contributions to the Smithsonian based on their official financial reports. Approval of cost-sharing commitment. All cost-sharing commitments must be referenced in the Office of Sponsored Projects proposal brief form and approved at the time of proposal by the unit director responsible for committing the funds. In accordance with SD 320, cost sharing on sponsored projects, cost sharing in excess of $100,000 requires additional approval from the appropriate undersecretary. Proposed cost sharing in excess of $1 million requires additional approval by the secretary. Types of cost share. Cash, cost share, refers to actual funds expended. For instance, if a piece of equipment is purchased for the project, the funds for this expense are cash. In-kind cost share refers to existing resources that have a value and directly benefit the project, but do not require additional expenditure of cash. For example, existing SI staff who devote effort to the project, or equipment maintenance costs that are paid by the department could be considered in-kind cost share. Examples of allowable cost share. Effort of any trust employee devoted to a federally funded sponsored project, including the associated fringe benefit costs. Note: federal employee salary and benefits may be cost shared on non-federal sponsored projects. Trust costs of any equipment purchase which is necessary for and dedicated to successful completion of the project. Trust costs of laboratory supplies and travel. Other allowable cost share. Waived or reduced indirect costs. For example, the difference between the applicable negotiated indirect cost rate and the amount awarded by the sponsor. Real property purchased with trust funds for the project. Costs incurred by subcontractors or other third parties, including third-party in-kind contributions not otherwise reimbursed. Examples of unallowable cost share. Funds that are part of SI's annual federal appropriation. Costs included as cost sharing for another project. Costs payable by the same sponsor under another award. Funds obtained from another federal grant or contract. Unallowable costs as defined in 2 CFR 200. Unallowable costs as defined by Smithsonian policy. Documentation of cost share records. The Smithsonian is responsible for providing the sponsor with financial reporting on grant-funded expenditures as well as cost share expenditures. While OSP prepares the financial report for the grant funds, the unit, the PI and the fund manager, must document and report on the cost-sharing portion of the expenditures. OSP asks that the fund manager complete internal cost-sharing forms and submit to OSP so that OSP can prepare a combined financial report to submit to the sponsor. The sponsor mandates the frequency of the financial reporting. Documentation of cost share continued. Items claimed for cost-sharing expenses may be documented on the institution's official accounting system or may be documented as in-kind contributions. For example, the contributed salary and benefits of an SI employee. Separate and detailed bookkeeping is often necessary to properly account for expenditures claimed as cost sharing. Rules for cost sharing on federal grants. The federal rules and requirements that govern the administration of grants and contracts to nonprofits are contained in 2 CFR 200, Uniform Guidance. This guidance states what kinds of costs you can incur to meet cost-sharing requirements. It also defines the cash or in-kind criteria that all cost share must meet as part of the non-federal entity's cost sharing or matching. Generally, such contributions should meet all the following criteria. The criteria for cost sharing on federal grants includes: Number 1. Must be verifiable. Matching and cost share contributions must be verifiable from the non-federal entity's records. Number 2. Not counted more than once. Matching and cost share contributions must not be included as contributions for any other federal award. Number 3. Needed for project or program. Matching and cost share contributions must be necessary and reasonable for accomplishment of the project or program objective. Number 4. Must be allowable costs. Matching and cost share contributions must be allowable under 2 CFR Part 200, Subpart E, Cost Principles, also known as the Uniform Guidance. Number 5. Not from federal sources. Matching and cost share contributions must not be paid by the federal government under another federal award unless federal statute authorizes it. Number 6. Included in approved budget. Matching and cost share contributions must be provided for the approved budget when required by federal awarding agency. Number 7. Conform to Statute 200.306. Matching and cost share contributions must conform to other provisions of Statute 200.306 cost sharing or matching as applicable. Number 8. Services are necessary. Services furnished by third-party personnel, consultants, and others must be an integral and necessary part of an approved project or program to be included in cost share or matching. Rules for cost share on private awards. Cost share expenditures on grants awarded from private sponsors are subject to the sponsor's written guidelines and the negotiated terms and conditions of the award document. This will be the primary criteria for audits involving cost share on private awards, instead of 2 CFR 200. Audit of grants with cost share. Grant and contract activities are subject to annual review by outside auditors, and grants that involve a cost share component are usually always audited. If an auditor finds problems with a cost share grant, the institution will be asked to refund grant monies to sponsors. Because cost sharing documentation is kept at the unit level, such refunds are usually paid by the unit. Change in project expenditures. During the life of a project, expenditure plans may change from the original budget and scope of work. The PI and fund manager should consult OSP if a change in the scope of work is anticipated, as the sponsor may be needed to approve such changes. Likewise, if there is a substantial change in grant-funded or cost-share expenditures, contact OSP to discuss whether the Smithsonian needs to advise the sponsor. A reduction in cost-share expenditures may mean a reduction in grant-funded expenditures. In summary, cost-share commitment in a proposal requires approval of unit director and OSP. Higher dollar amounts may require additional approvals from your assigned undersecretary and the secretary. There are limitations to what SI can cost share based on sponsor guidelines, institutional guidelines, and federal guidelines for federally funded grants. All cost share expenditures require proper documentation, which is the responsibility of the PI and fund manager. OSP staff is responsible for providing guidance to you and to assist in preparing financial reporting to the sponsor on grant funds and cost share funds. Thank you. Please feel free to contact the Office of Sponsored Projects if you have any questions. You can email ospmail@si.edu or call 202-633-7110.